All right, and here we are, live in the flesh. My name is Tao Hill. I am the Chief Customer Officer for ProcureNow. ProcureNow is a certified small business headquartered in California. Our mission is to partner with public procurement to build modern, intuitive software solutions to transform efficiency and innovation in local government. I lead our customer programs here. I've been working as a software consultant in local government for about 20 years. What drives my passion for local government is the customers I work with. I get an immense amount of joy helping you leverage technology to drive success in your personal careers and your communities and transform your roles and your careers. I'm truly honored to be able to make a career out of this and of helping so many public servants such as yourself. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone for the work that you do in your communities. Tom, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is Tom Spengler. Really excited to be here. Echo everything Tao said. We got to work together at Granicus for a decade, and it was the most fun that I've had in my career for sure. So I was the CEO and founder at Granicus, ran that for 15 years, and then exited the business, and I'm back again in GovTech as the executive chairman of PrimeGov. It's really kind of a 2.0 of Granicus, so 100% cloud-based, new technology built by a team that's been in the space for 20 years. Javier Muni is my co-founder and CTO, joined us, and Sharif Agib, my VP of operations, is really running the business. And so excited to be back. We think we can make a big impact in helping communities, and certainly this worldwide pandemic has created new opportunities for technology and fast transformation, and I think it's a really interesting time.
Awesome. And I'll just say, I'm so happy that I get to share this webinar today with someone who I've known for decades, I can say that now, yeah. And with someone who I just have recently met, and it's just been such a joy to get to work with Theresa. Theresa, would you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Theresa Webb, and I've got over 30 years of procurement experience. The most recent 18 years was in public procurement. About 10 years ago, knowing that at some point I wanted to shift my career and really engage in a different way, I started my consulting company, Solut Consulting, and with that, over the time period since I started the company, I've had the opportunity to work with some local organizations, procurement organizations, as well as some local, national, and state level professional organizations. I've also, during my career, was a member of the NIGP Member Council as well as the Talent Council, and have worked on various projects with NIGP, most recently working to draft new coursework for the new NIGP classes and the pathways. I hold a master's and a bachelor degree in business. And outside of the teaching and instructing and speaking, the consulting work that I do is really focused on process review, building templates for your organization's strategic planning, policy and procedure drafting, as well as all of the drafting of the manuals that procurement needs, and staff training. So with that, let's move into our first slide and get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Theresa. So we're going to kind of take you through some different steps of the process, and I'll let Theresa sort of kick it off.
All right. So our journey today will start with realization. We've got to know where we are. We've got to realize where we are before we can decide where it is that we need to go, what we need to do to get there. And then we're going to interject a period for recovery before we realign our business practices and policies and technology. And then we'll be ready for rebooting and really moving into the future with the confidence that we can do this and we know what we need to do. As we travel as procurement folks, and we may have some others from other disciplines out there as well, but normally I'm speaking directly to procurement folks. But as we move through this journey over the next few months of going from realization to rebooting our organizations, it's going to require us to really tap into every aspect of our humanity in order to reframe our needs in a meaningful way that will allow us to connect to everyone that's involved, because so much of our connection now may be virtual rather than in person. Of course, just a reminder, as you go through the process and present your information to those administrative folks to get approvals for these changes, it's not just exactly what you say all the time, it's how you say it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but we've got to make sure we're presenting this in a way that resonates. So as we move on to the next slide, we're going to talk about reframing. And many of you, I know from conversations, have made lots of adjustments over the past few months just so that your procurement operations can continue. As we move from recovery, I encourage you not to revert back to the previous way, the old way of doing things. Rather, use this opportunity to really springboard, use it as a catalyst to reframe the future of your procurement organization, and perhaps even procurement, the profession as a whole. There was a saying, Muhammad El-Arian, who is a corporate chief economic advisor for one of the very large investment firms, was on the Meet the Press a couple of Sunday mornings ago. And he made an interesting statement that going forward, there need to be a labor retooling, which I found interesting. But it's also true of our procurement organizations. I totally agree that now is the time to actually retool our organizations and transform them. We really have an incredible opportunity right now to reframe the future of procurement in our organizations. But we've got to be very intentional about how we make that transition to ensure that we're making good decisions that are going to carry us forward for the next crisis. Because though it may not be a global pandemic like we're in right now, there will be other crises and emergencies that we have to endure. COVID-19 has impacted every aspect of our work in our life. We all know that. That's no secret. And it has really changed our lives significantly over the past few months. I read an article recently in Microsoft that they, as a company, and I'm not giving any support to Microsoft over any other company, but it was an interesting statement from their CEO that they had seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in the last couple of months in their company alone. Now, a lot of those, most of those were specific to team chats and online meetings. Oh yeah, there was gaming services too, but that's another webinar. But as the world shifted to working to playing and working at home, because of the pandemic, these things occurred. Virtual meetings, virtual offices, electronic distribution and receipt of documents, they all play a part in the reframing of the future of procurement as we go forward. It's our hope today that this webinar will provide you with some ideas on some critical steps to fully engage in this new reality and succeed, such as choosing the right technology, platform to suit your organization, providing the vision and execution to transform your operations, to conduct business in this new reality. There was a statement, another statement by the Microsoft CEO, which is up on your screen right now, Satya Nadella. He said, as new work norms evolve, organizations are realizing they need a comprehensive solution that brings together communications, collaboration, and business process. In our time today, myself and the other presenters will cover some of the basic concepts for reframing your procurement organization. Tom, you've spent a couple of decades building technologies that help connect government, whether it's with the citizens or internally within the organizations. What are some of the things that you've seen that are really becoming more critical now more than ever, and why that is?
Yeah, I mean, what I think's really interesting right now is all the things that I've been part of, which have been, cloud-based applications for government that also help automate a core business process. And in my case, it's almost always been around agenda management. Those are certainly having their day. So the ability to work from anywhere, access your software anywhere, light computer loads. When I work from home, maybe I don't have quite the computing power that I have in my office. So the ability to run all of my processes remotely. And then we spent a lot of time, really our pivot at PrimeGov was taking these meeting management tools for live meeting, voting, and requesting to speak, and vote display, and speaker timers, and pulling that up into a virtual environment, integrating it with Zoom, and helping our customers and others who needed to pivot to these virtual meetings make that pivot, which is just such a small slice of what governments had to do in terms of shutting down physical locations and spinning up virtual locations. And on the purchasing side, we've been part of continuing to do business and responding to bids. And we recently were responding to a bid for Visalia, California. And, at the very last minute, of course, we've all got a bunch of things to do. We're scrambling to try to get this put together. And it's like, print 5 copies of this 300-page document, bid response with signatures and notary. And it's like, oh my gosh, like we're not going to be able to respond because we just can't get this done now. With my little laser printer that holds like 100 pages of paper and, print cartridges that can do about the same. And so, we were finally like emailing, and they allowed us to submit just the PDF of our response via email at the last minute. So, continuing to operate and do what you need to do in this virtual environment has been a challenge. And it's great that there's some new tools out there that were kind of designed with that virtual environment, cloud environment in mind.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. And I'll just, we're going to hold, Theresa and I are going to hold our breaths on that comment that Tom just made about emailing bids in. We're going to come back to that. We'll come back to that. I think that's one of the lessons that we'll definitely talk a little bit more about today. So I appreciate that, Tom. All right, so we're going to take a little bit of break before we go in, and we're going to do our first poll. So if you wouldn't mind, it's just a couple things that we're doing, kind of fun, informative, interactive. The first poll that I would love for you guys to participate in, if you scroll down there, it says, how would you best describe the last 100 days for you? So if you could just take a moment and just respond to that for me, please. And we'll just let that run for just a moment while folks are responding. I really appreciate that. For some of us, I think that, for some of us, when something like this happens, when we're in a crisis, we really tend to shine. And I think that as buyers and procurement officers, and other folks that work in public service, we tend to be those people that tend to do pretty well, when presented with challenges, so it doesn't surprise me as folks are continuing to answer that. I appreciate your participation in that. It seems like that a lot of folks, nearly is what it's saying is that 60% has been able to turn on a dime and keep everything and everyone on track as planned. And another, and I'll just I'll pull this over here so you can kind of see it. You've had, but then also just like another 40% we've had a few near misses, and schedules got pushed on some projects, but they're doing okay. We do have a couple of folks that are, doing a little bit not as well as that, and I appreciate your honesty. But I'm actually, it doesn't surprise me as much to see that our folks that are out there that are used to responding in crisis are able to do pretty well right now. So thank you so much for participating in that, and I will turn it back over to Theresa.
All right, so most of us, a lot of us, have never really been faced with a real crisis situation at our agencies. We've seen and heard from our colleagues and on the news about mass shootings and earthquakes and hurricanes and things like that. But unfortunately, when that situation doesn't directly affect us and it's not our reality, we don't always consider how it would affect us and our operations. So we just choose not to even react or take any actions. Well, COVID-19 pandemic was everybody's reality. And suddenly we were having to react to situations that we had never confronted before in our lives. Everyone that I've come in contact with has spent the last couple of months scrambling to keep their procurement organizations operational and secure the needs in a manner that didn't conflict with statutes and policies. And many times those items that were being procured meant life or death for folks. So it had a real impact. And I also know from speaking to a lot of you that most of you or many of you have been aware for some time that maybe there were some early warning signs that your procurement organizations weren't necessarily operating as efficiently as they needed to, that maybe your strategies and policies weren't in line, that would give you the opportunity to function in the most in best practice way, in the most efficient way. But, everyone kept struggling along, and perhaps what was holding us back was funding or uncertainty about how to go about doing that, or maybe just a little bit of a resistance to a transformational change, or maybe it was lack of support from our organizations. However, when COVID-19 hit, we were all ordered to stay at home. It now became crystal clear that there were some operational crises that needed to be dealt with, and something needed to be done. Again, based upon the poll, some of you, those crises may have been smaller than it was for others, but we all had some things that we had to deal with and do differently. Suddenly there were questions out there about how to go about conducting pre-bids, drafting and issuing solicitations, and the really big one, receiving solicitation responses and doing bid openings. Many of you guys were rushing to put some things in place, some measures that would allow you to function because you didn't have any measures in place, or your policies didn't allow you to do the things that you needed to do to keep doing business. Unfortunately, some of those may have been done so quickly that there may still be some holes in your business processes that need to be taken care of. Tom, as a government vendor, you had told us about interacting with the organization in putting together the bid at the last minute. Tal, do you have anything that you can chime in on that and tell us?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. You guys can hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was just making sure I wasn't on mute. So, to really speak to that, I think that one of the thank you for letting us know. A couple of things I just want to mention here from what Theresa has said. First of all, I feel like that these stories that we're telling, like this, like the fact that like I also experienced, I experienced it from another perspective. I had a potential customer, now as a customer, to reach out to us and share their story about how they were working with their IT department to develop a way for them to take their bids, and they ended up, instead of doing the email option, they thought the better way would be do like an FTP upload. Which honestly, like, actually just didn't even, it didn't solve the problem. The problem was still the same. We all have those rules that particularly around sealed bid compliance, that no one can have access to any of the proposals or bids until after the deadline passes. And so even with FTP sites and secure FTP sites and email addresses, the moment that it hits that the other side of that wall, you are potentially giving access to a lot of different people. And so, to me, like, that story says a couple of things. It says, first of all, like, it's important that even though this is just a technology issue, that we understand the policies that need to be in place. And I know that I'm kind of preaching to the choir here a little bit. But also, I think it's our responsibility to help our bosses and our management realize like what's happening on the ground. I can't really like blame that organization for making that decision. When we have this knowledge, but we aren't sharing that knowledge upward. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's really kind of like the crux of this conversation, is that how you can share this knowledge and communicate upward, so that you can get the things that you need. And also, at the same time, we're solving some of the big problems that your upper management, your boss, your administration team is trying to solve. How can we connect those two together? I appreciate you letting me ring in on that, Theresa.
All right. So we're going to move into the next phase, which is recovery. And I'd like to read an article that I found, and this came from a study done by Harvard scientists. And I'll just read a little excerpt of it. It says, there is a simple breathing technique that works fast to reduce stress. You take 10 slow, deep belly breaths, feeling your abdomen expand as you inhale and contract as you exhale. In doing that, it reduces anxiety by 67%, lowers your blood pressure 10 points, and helps you feel 50% calmer, all in 60 seconds that it takes to do that. So with that in mind, and before we move on to our next point and discuss recovery, I'd like for everyone to join me in a little exercise. Just because we're meeting virtually doesn't mean that everyone can't join in and interact with each other. So right now, I ask that you stand up where you are, or if you feel like that's kind of silly, you can do it from your seat. But I want you to stand up, and I want you to take 3 really deep breaths. Inhale to the count of 5, and then exhale. So ready? Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, exhale. Inhale and exhale. Now, you can do this at your desk, no matter where your desk is. And if things begin to get a little crazy, then I suggest that you try this therapy to reduce that stress. Now, I'd like for you guys to interact for just a moment using the chat function. Since a lot of us have been under stay-at-home orders, we've had very little distractions, so we've had some extra time on our hands. I'd like for you to go to the chat and put in any new hobby or activity that you've taken up during this, or something maybe that you picked back up that you haven't done in a really long time. Post it in the chat and then respond to another person's post. For me, that hobby or that activity that I took up was bicycling. We could go outside and do exercise, and I live in a very small neighborhood. It's a pretty quiet neighborhood, and I haven't ridden a bicycle since I was a kid. And so I got a regular bicycle, no gears, no handbrakes, just a plain old bicycle like I had when I was a little girl. And it's really, I have forgotten the feeling of freedom that goes with riding a bicycle. So let's look at some of your stretching. Going to the office, no changes. Oh, too bad. Chipping away at home improvement. Exercising, getting a puppy. Good for you.
Good for you, Tara.
Painting and redecorating. Cleaning. Wow.
I saw somebody say, Pat down in Florida said that she's taken up streaming home concerts or streaming concerts, like live concerts at home. That's awesome.
All right. Well, good for you guys. It's good that you are taking that time for yourself. Very important that you do that. I like this one. Over the weekend, you made a cabin playhouse. Is this for your grandson? Good for you. All right. Lots of cleaning and reorganizing. I did some of that myself as well. There's something about cleaning that's therapeutic, is it not? What about you, Tao? Did you take up anything?
So I did decide to, I bought a house here in Sacramento last June, and I decided to turn my garage into a gym. And then I put down new flooring and put in new cabinets and sort of rearranged everything. And I have to say though that the thing that the thing that I actually have done the most, and I haven't said it on here though, and I think we should maybe tip our hat a little bit to it, is that we've worked more. And because I think that that's been a real thing. For me, what kicked in was that instinct to like when I'm in crisis mode, there's like this instinct to sort of like get help in some way. I'm from the South, and I grew up along, and I spent some time along the coast, like where you are, Theresa. I was in Louisiana, and so when you go through hurricane seasons enough, I think there's some of that gets built in. It's like everyone just sort of like kicks in, and community starts to help. And so I really felt that. I felt that like I was in this sort of like sense of urgency mode to like help. And so I did that, of course, doing the work that we're doing at Procure Now, but also helping raise money for the Sacramento Food Bank.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
A couple comments
Hey,
in
Tom.
there about extra
I know that
free
you said you spent some time with the kids.
I think if you've got
your kids in the
kids
pool,
like
is that what I saw?
at the house, you've lost all of your free time. But my kids love it. I literally went back downstairs to the kitchen from my office this morning at like 7:30, and my son asked me if I was going back to work afterwards. I was all done. And it's like, no, I've been there for an hour, and it's 7:30 now, and he's having breakfast. But yeah, the kids want to play, and we've done the whole home gym thing as best we could to get our exercise in. And then in Arizona now, it's just the perfect time to be in your pool. So working on the kids swimming and just getting in the pool after work every day.
All right. Great discussion. Again, it's a great list of activities that you guys have there. Kudos to all of you. These types of activities really allow us to decompress, and that is so important to our well-being. And, you know, through all this, we really have experienced some trauma the past few months, whether it's at work, with our work teams, personally, or the communities that we serve, or maybe even among our peers. And that's why right now it's really time to get refueled, refreshed, and ready to tackle what's ahead. Because a procurement person's work is never done. You know, we're all aware, we've seen the medical reports about burnout and what can occur after going through difficult times. And that means that we, you know, need to check in on ourselves, take care of ourselves and those around us as well. Right now, you know, you may be feeling exhausted, ineffective, overwhelmed, which is really natural when you go through a crisis situation. Of course, because of that, we may be engaging in some escape behaviors, such as excessive drinking. Now, I know purchasing people would never do that, but some people would. Even you may be experiencing some physical symptoms related to stress. Can't sleep good at night, can't go to sleep, you got a racing heart, shortness of breath. Recovery from all of this doesn't go away by itself. And that's why I think that's important over the next few weeks for everyone to take a little time to decompress, take care of yourself, and just recover from the hectic pace and all the work-related stress that you've been under. You need some time and space to refresh your mind and your body and to recuperate so that you're ready to engage and continue making positive impact for your customers, your agencies, and your communities. Again, slow down, keep an upbeat perspective, and you'll be off and running again in no time. But take that time. I do offer a word of caution on this little sabbatical, if you want to call it that. Don't let it go on too long, because there is work to do. Review where you are and get things realigned so that the next time, and unfortunately, there will probably be a next time, things will run even smoother because you have the processes and the tools in place to keep everything moving. Once we've taken a moment to recuperate and recover, it's really time now to identify our core issues and strategize ways to realign our business models. Tao, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, and I just like the part of the reason why we really wanted to talk about this aspect of recovery and trauma, and taking care of ourselves and going through these exercises, was really to there's a real purpose behind this, and that is to highlight that, you know, just because we're in this public health crisis that has caused us to not have physical close contact with our family, our teams, our community, our industry, which are the things that are sort of like the lifeblood for us when, as connectors. If we're not careful, we don't take the time to do exactly what we just did, which is take a moment and learn about each other. You know, there's a human on the other side of these text messages, and we're learning about them. If we're not careful, we're going to end up making decisions that are impersonal, and it really doesn't take into consideration our humanity. Like Theresa mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, it's going to take the spectrum of our humanity in order for us to make the right decisions, and so to make sure that we're caring for each other. You know, so as you are having these conversations with your team, having these conversations with your boss, your management, the administration, and you are seeking ways to improve your environment while also improving the situation for your local businesses or whatever. Just remember to try to keep it human. I love the people that are on this webinar now just by because the fact that Theresa asked that question. and that we're able to connect a little bit better. So I appreciate everybody just taking part in this and understanding that this part is just extremely important.
All right, thanks, Tao. So how do we get started with reframing our procurement organizations so that we can move forward? We've got to realign our business model. We need to make sure that we really understand what the real issues are and what problems that we're trying to put measures in place to solve. Here are just a few that come to mind to consider how they'll affect us going forward. So you need to consider work from home for non-essential government employees and functions may be the norm. I actually heard someone the other day in a conversation that I was in said, we're on work from home until whenever. There's no end date, and they're not talking about it changing for any time soon. We need to look at, the fact that there's social distancing is going to be implemented at the workplace if we do go back to the workplace. So how do we deal with that? Business processes are going to need to be re-engineered so that we can work remotely. Now, a lot of us that have already started working remotely, then, we've put things in place. But again, we need to back up and make sure that in our hurry to put those in place so that we could function, that we didn't miss some things that we need to have in place. And our CIOs, our chief technology officers, are going to be pushed to modernize the IT structure. So now is the time. If you need to modernize your procurement technology, now is the time to start working on that and get that information so it can be part of the greater organizational plan. There's also efforts to prevent a reoccurrence of COVID-19, and that's, those efforts may blur some of the lines between our personal privacy and health surveillance programs. So that's something that we need to consider, HIPAA and surveillance and knowing who was with who and those types of things. I went the other day finally to the nail salon for a pedicure after seemed like forever, and they wanted name, address, and phone number, because if someone, was reported with the virus, then whoever was there that day could be contacted. So it's something we've got to deal with. Elected and appointed officials are going to focus on proactive, recurrent response based on the lessons that we've learned. And I am sure that there are a lot of lessons that we've learned and a lot of best practices that are going to come out of this. So we need to take those and use those. There's going to be some fiscal budget constraints. And a lot of that's going to drive the need for innovation and new technology. So again, we need to make sure that we're being proactive, that we're getting in on the front end. And our legislators, our policymakers, our governing bodies, hopefully they will be rewriting policy to align with this new normal behaviors and realities in governing after COVID-19. So again, this is a great time. If there are changes that need to be made to those policies, now is the time to do those, because you can tie it directly into this and probably have a much better chance of obtaining a real support for that. So let's move on to the next slide and talk about some of the things that we need to realign. And we touched on some of them just a moment ago, but the budget and backing, it's really time now to build that business case for changing your policy, for integrating new technologies and practices into your procurement operations. Get those requests before your administration so that they can include those as funding as part of the budget process. And I know a lot of you are getting close to that budget process if you're not already in it right now. So it's urgent that you get that information before your administration. And be sure that you include caveats in that business plan that really resonate with those government officials. Technology that allows you to function within all of your policies and statutory requirements, like bid openings and sealed proposals and bids, those types of things. And also that these new things that you're asking for will allow you to move these projects that they are very interested in, the community, the public is very interested in, that you can continue work on those and moving those forward. You also want to implement changes to the policy. Policies need to be reviewed and they need to be realigned to allow for flexibility in making the changes to processes at the discretion of the procurement official and as best practices and new technologies come along. In procurement, we spend our days making sure that the scope and the specs are really clear so there's no misunderstanding what it is that we're buying. Well, a lot of times that kind of flows over into writing policies, and then we become real restricted. And in an emergency situation, they're so definitive that they restrict us from being able to do our job. It's real important that the policies be drafted at a very high level so that there is some type of approvals for your procurement official so that this doesn't have to go before your governing body. Save those how-to details for your instructions, for your procedures, but not in your policies if it at all can be avoided. And while we're talking about policies, an emergency policy is really, really important. One that allows flexibility during a crisis and provides the procurement official with the discretionary authority that they need to continue making business operations. And I strongly encourage each of you, if you don't have one in place, to craft one in the very near future and get that approved and in your organization. We need to move procurement processes to electronic format. I mean, we've all known that for a long time. And again, as we talked about earlier, for many of us, that may not have happened yet. So there's a lot of things, though, that we need to do in advance of transitioning to that paperless virtual for a long period of time. Processes and instructions need updating, as well as your policies that will allow for that. Market research is going to need to be conducted, or perhaps an RFP issued for electronic format platforms, for your meetings, for your solicitation process. And so those are also going to need to be considered. One other thing that may need to be considered is a very detailed, fully detailed continuity of business plan. Not just a few pages that have some general information that maybe minimally meets the FEMA requirements. It needs to be a really detailed document, one that spells out the primary roles for procurement if it's a one-day event, what functions are required if it's a week event, or if it's a month or longer event, such as we've just experienced. And not only what our roles are and our specific functions that are required for those time periods, but what are the resources that we need as well. Down to the number of computers, the number of keyboards, the number of phones, copiers, telephones, everything that we need for each of those. Not only the minimum that we would need to function for that time period, but also the optimal, so that we've got that information. And with this, we really have a game plan for any type of emergency, regardless of what it is. Now, certainly every emergency is going to bring about some different things that have to be considered that you couldn't possibly think about or put in a manual. But this will give us a really good game plan. And then when another emergency occurs, we can pull out our manuals and know exactly what it is we need to do. That in itself can be really stabilizing and reassuring when we're in the throes of a chaotic situation. Once we identify where those deficiencies are, we need to be creative in creating our solutions. And I'd like to give you an example. It was something that I read. Again, this was in a Harvard Business Review article that I read recently. And it shows that sometimes we may, in an emergency, need to rethink our practices. To what we've really been talking about here, we need that flexibility to be able to rethink those work practices at a moment's notice on the fly. So in brief, the story was there was an ice storm that shut down the Louisville, Kentucky UPS hub in 2009. If any of you have ever lived where there's an ice storm, you cannot get out and go in an ice storm. It's totally different than a snowstorm. So the local workers could not get to the airport, to the UPS hub, to load all the packages that were now in the warehouse from before the storm hit, so that those could be delivered. But employees could still travel by air. So UPS went and got volunteers from their employees that were at other locations that could travel, brought them in on a UPS plane or on a plane. It didn't say, it just said a plane. I assumed it was a UPS plane, but maybe not. Those folks came in, walked across the tarmac to the hub, loaded all of the items onto the UPS planes that were waiting. The planes then took off. We returned those employees back to their homes. Problem solved. So again, we have to think about that and make that interchangeability in our jobs and how we do them. Tal or Tom, do you have anything to add to this before we move on? I know you guys have probably had some similar instances.
Tom, anything? I'll just want to say that was a really awesome story that you told there, Theresa, and just explaining how not only do we need to be able to turn on the dime, but you have to be able to write turning on a dime into your policy. And I really like that. You know, I've had some personal experiences, you know, again with like hurricane recovery and that type of thing, where you know it requires that you decentralize your decision making in a way that that's trustworthy and immediate, so that I don't have to like wait for answers constantly. But I can decentralize that decision making very quickly in order to be able to keep functions running.
There's a whole bunch of different
level.
threads here that I find really interesting.
So I think that's awesome.
Carol asked a
Tom?
question here around policy flexibility, and so much what I see in business continuity planning is replication of old process through technology. So, for example, for us. Public meetings is a big part of what we do, and so the ability to replicate speaking for 3 minutes in a meeting in a virtual environment or in a digital environment is like what the goal started out to be. And when you think about it, I mean, I've probably been to 1,000 city councils, school board of supervisors meetings, public meetings. Like the public comment part is so ridiculous, right? I mean, it's just not a good use of anybody's time in most cases. I mean, there's a lot of people. You get this subset of people that are not really representative of your community. Usually it's just a handful. It's the same people every time. and they usually just have something to say that's not really even on the agenda. Occasionally you get somebody who's got something really important to say about an agendized item, and then they only have 3 minutes and there's no dialogue, right? And so as we're going virtual and digital, it's like, oh, how do I replicate that? And so we've been doing these text-based comments that go into a report that fit and replicate the 3 minutes. But if you're going to redefine your process for a virtual world, like, well, why not rethink it from the beginning? I think that's a really interesting concept. And, how do we want timely and actionable feedback for agendized items in public meetings? And so we're really committed to leading the way on that conversation with communities, and how do we give tools that are both great for our constituents to get more involved and give feedback, but are also very digestible at the right time for government. And I think all of your processes, you've got to look at, can I go 100% digital? Can I use any device? What do I do about security, right? Like when I get into my banking on my phone, I'm using face recognition to access my account. When I'm probably in my government agency logging into my systems, I'm using a username and password, which is fine, but most of my protection is around the firewall, right? And so how we can actually get better security in the cloud through two-factor authentication and things like that than we get on-prem behind the firewall. But it's just the way we've always done things. So, and then I also think the other concept that we've got to take into consideration is backup staff. How my job, if I'm out and I'm sick or I'm unavailable, who can take those roles over for me, and not just having these single point of failures. So anyways, a bunch of thoughts there around kind of business continuity.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. So I will just warn everybody here, we're at kind of like the 20-minute mark. The webinar will go to 12:15. So we still have a few more things to do or talk about, but I just wanted to kind of let everybody know like where we are on our time frame. I'm gonna jump in here, and this topic is it's not the most positive topic, but I certainly just wanted to take a moment to just talk about this, because we are talking about realignment and reframing, and talk a little bit about how like the consequences really have to be, or really have been, don't have to be, they really have been realigned. Before all this started, the potential consequences of not realigning our priorities and our technology tool set meant things like, it was less convenient, or or at the very worst, we were going to get sued, or we might like affect staff happiness, or maybe vendors are a little bit more confused before. Now, in addition to just heightened legal issues, public safety, spread of disease, and honestly, like the livelihood of small businesses, that's all really at stake. And it's something that I really like to, I think public procurement and buyers are we talk about essential workers, but in this age and time where it is so important that we have opportunities for local businesses to work, that you're at the front and center, and very much in control of of making sure that those opportunities still exist. And so I think that again, like the something that you can take back to your management and to your boss, and even have those discussions with with your city managers or with your administrative officers, that I'm sure they certainly want to see the small businesses and local businesses in their communities survive this, and procurement and purchasing and the public-private partnerships can play a much more critical role than they had before in helping make sure that happens. So you're really in a position to have those conversations and express to them just how critical it is that you have these tool sets that allow you to have this continuity of government, because it can mean the difference between businesses surviving and businesses going out of business. So yeah, and then with that, that's kind of like the realignment that I was really hoping that we can really talk about, that by having some of these tools that are available and implementing them today, the possibility of that succeeding far outweighs the risk of not getting the maximum amount of value that you could get. So the stakes are really high. Indecision and inaction can actually lead to major problems, like spreading disease and local companies going out of business. So with that, I kind of want to take just a little part of this webinar to talk about some of the technology that you can use to help you reboot your operations so that they can function at optimum levels going forward. As far as the thing that I wanted to kind of mention just around like electronic procurement and electronic bidding, and the fact that like there's this sort of a specific way to do that. The slide that I wanted to present was actually a slide that talked about the experiences of our customers. And so it's not the obvious things that you would think of, just like, okay, we went electronic and now we're paperless, and now people don't have to show up in City Hall in order to be able to have that. Like, that's great. Like, that allowed us to keep going. But as you see here, like some of the what our customers who signed up with us during this time experienced in the case of working with us was they were able to make this transition and make it really quickly, and for large teams, and they didn't have to they didn't essentially have to disrupt their process at all, and in fact, the process actually got better. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to post just like some of these comments that you can see. And we're going to make sure that you have the slides so that you can read this as well. Really, the purpose wasn't to for you to read every bit of it, but just to explain the outcome. The outcome of this from a vendor's perspective, that it was, like Tom mentioned, going from paper to paperless so that you could actually respond. But when some of our customers surveyed their bidders afterwards, what they found was that what they said the most was that it was so easy, and that it was much easier and efficient and more streamlined than before. It's much this one was it's so much easier on site or online than it is on site, and just over and over again, that like not only were we helping them stay safe, but the actual process was actually better than it was before. And so, that's really the thing that I just wanted to mention, that that you have an opportunity to not only solve the problem of keeping everyone safe, of keeping these opportunities running, but you also have the opportunity to up your game when it comes to the levels of service that you can offer to your staff, to yourself, to your bidders and vendors as well. And that's really like, to me, like, I feel like that one of the reasons why more modern technology today can help with that is because we can actually build into the experience not only the software itself, but we can build in like live collaboration into that software as well. It's really like the major reason why our customers have been able to go live with something that was could have been very disruptive, but instead was able to do that in a very non-disruptive and sort of seamless way. They sort of learned as they went along. They asked some questions, and there's actually someone sitting on the other side of that new experience, helping guide them along. And so, like, I just think that that's like one very, very critical thing that we can look for when we talk about the right technology, is finding that technology that allows you to do live collaboration with either your staff, with citizens, or with like the vendors that you're working with, and those citizens and vendors, bidders, etc. So that was just the part that I felt like that was sort of like the interesting thing that I've taken out of this time, is the piece that's really been most meaningful is our ability to inject like live human interaction with the solution, and how that has like increased levels of service. So with that, I'd love if Tom, if you could spend a few minutes just talking about some of the other
Cool.
things
Thank you,
that
Tal.
from a
I'm going
technology
to go
tool
really
set
quick because I've mentioned or touched on a lot of
might
these
be
things
useful, and then
before, but
talk a little bit
huge
about
believer in cloud.
some best practices
we
around
were
virtual
one of the
public
first
meetings.
we were one of the Granicus. We were one of the first cloud solutions for almost all of our early customers. So we've kind of learned the strengths and weaknesses there, and I think the efficiency of the technology, ability to run it without big infrastructure investment and a lot of IT support should be really looked at as part of the cost. These implementations can be done completely by the vendor and supported by the vendor as part of that cost. So there's not a lot there. Mobile workforce. You see all these comments on here of people enjoying working from home, and I think we want to be able to do our job from anywhere on any device. I want to be able to get emergency notifications on my phone. I want to be able to work on my laptop at home, and I want all that to be secure.
Yeah.
And that's all possible now. And then certainly when it comes to virtual meetings, I want to share a few statistics, but we talked about the environmental impact a decade ago of having people come to some of these meetings where there's really no interaction. And I think bid openings is a perfect one where the bids are just open in red, and there's like no real chance for conversation. So why are we not doing those virtual and saving gas and the environment and parking and and people's time, all the things that go along. So anyways, we've done a lot, hundreds of virtual meetings over the last couple of months with our clients. And I did a survey to about 2,200 agencies. And here's just a few interesting stats that we found. So 67% chose Zoom for their virtual meetings. 12% chose GoToMeeting, and then less than 8% for everybody else. 44% have implemented some sort of digital mailbox, so text-based interactions. Usually it's just an email, which doesn't have a lot of automation, but some people have gone more advanced. For public meetings, we've been seeing about less than 5% implement voting digitally. And I think if you have over 10 elected officials, voting gets a little tougher, but under taking a voice vote, roll call vote isn't too bad. Only 10% have done what I call kind of visual context or visual displays of data in their meetings. So we have a PowerPoint presentation here, but this is more like things like what was the vote, speaker timer, what item are we on, who's the mover, who's the seconder. We're displaying those things, but still kind of low numbers in terms of layering those things in. And then on average, people expected to do virtual meetings through June. So we're coming up on kind of the last month of expected. Everybody's a little bit different there. And then the average satisfaction by the agencies of their meetings was 7.7 out of 10, which I think was really good. And, early on there was some Zoom bombings and there was some hacking the chat and things like that. But I think those have all been pretty much figured out. And so I'm super proud of how well government's done with virtual meetings. And now I think there's an opportunity for another step to kind of again, just not do the minimum requirements, but actually advance your processes a little bit and add some of those advanced features, whether it's for city council meetings or other kind of virtual meeting opportunities. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. We'll just I'm gonna step over onto the next part of this around just the real crux of the topic here, which is the reframing and communicating that reframing. We've touched on some of this, but my hope for you is that you can take away some key points that help you align your needs with your administration's priorities right now, so that you can get what you need to support them yourself, your team, and your vendors better. Like Theresa mentioned before, it's not necessarily about what you say, it is how you say it, it's how you present it. It's about aligning what you need with what's most important right now. And so, the things that I'm showing on the slides here are just in kind of summary. We have moved, the problems that we've had have moved from convenience to critical. And I think that that's important for, especially in procurement. A lot of things, and I mentioned this before, a lot of things that we were doing before were to sort of improve convenience, improve efficiency. But now they're becoming like really critical to the operation of government. And the kind of cool thing about it is that the solutions are out there, and for the most part, like these are solutions that you're familiar with. Now I know, like, bringing Tom in to talk about virtual public meetings, to a webinar that's mostly buyers, but also I know that they're out there. I know that there's at least one person who is also a clerk and that also handles public bid openings. I saw her name earlier. And so this is something that's extremely important to her. And I know that role of clerk can cross over when it comes to public meetings and doing and handling procurement, because a lot of the policies are the same. Fortunately, the solutions are out there and you're largely familiar with them. The only difference is that now the need is heightened, and the time frame to act has gone from, like, I'm so used to having conversations with folks, so they're like, yeah, I'm going to consider e-procurement in like 2022. And that was so normal before, right, Tom and Theresa? Like, that was so normal for people to have like a 2-3 year plan to like think about it and research it, and now that time frame to act has gotten like really short. And so one of those things that need to be considered is, as we mentioned before, to make sure that the onboarding time is really minimal. You don't have time for this. You need to have the technology, but you don't have time to okay, everybody, let's slow down and do a kickoff, and then let's talk about our implementation plan for 2 months, and then get everybody trained over 3 trainings. Like, that was sort of like the typical way we would do this before. And now it's like, I gotta have this in an hour, or I got to have this the next day. So how can you do that? How can you make sure that when you are searching for these technologies, that you're paying attention to the fact that, like, it's not that you can do it and it's comprehensive, but it also causes very few disruptions. And so I think that major disruptions in new technology can actually be a thing of the past, if we choose wisely. So in general, like, how do we help you have these conversations? So these are sort of specific things about you can think about when you're having those conversations. But in general, I kind of just wanted to leave you with a couple of key points around just generally how you can communicate these changes up and across. The first key point I wanted to mention is be careful of saying the problem is a lack of something, because when you go to someone and you're like, the problem is I don't have electronic bidding. Actually, that's not the problem. What you're expressing to them is the solution. And when you do that, you have a hard time helping them connect to, well, why did you really need it in the first place? And that goes back to that conversation we had before, where if you go to them with these specific problems, and that leads me to my next point, be specific about a very specific problem that affects the person who you're talking to. So not just around like, hey, like, I need e-procurement, or I need like electronic bidding, but hey, like, this bridge repair isn't going to happen unless we do this. Or this project that was #1 on my city manager's list is not going to happen if we don't have these tools in place, right? So that's the thing just to think about, is like, be wary of like going and saying, hey, like, I need collaboration tools, or I need a microphone and camera. Everybody needs a bunch of laptops, but instead kind of like think about their perspective and where they're coming from, and try to frame the problem in a way that that makes the most sense to them. And the interesting thing about this is that whether the problem is staying closed and continuing to work from home, or the problem is like helping them open up, so that we can sort of establish a new normal, that you have the same solutions actually will solve both problems, right? And so I think that, like, just be prepared to pivot the priority problem that's the most important to your mayor, to your administration, to help you get those tools that you need, because they're actually the same tools that are going to help you solve either problem. So that was sort of like my last tip, is just like try to practice framing the problems in multiple ways, so that you are so that you're going to get what you need regardless of what the priority is, because ultimately, like, you're going to need these tools either way. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Theresa.
All right. Well, you talk about reframing, and reframing really is kind of like a ship that's sailing from a port, or like the space shuttle that's headed to the moon or somewhere. One tiny degree off can, you can miss the mark. So we want to make sure that as we're going through this process of reframing things, that we're really on target with how we go about it and what we're looking for in the process. Let's do that very last, the second poll. And
Yes.
I think a lot of folks have already answered it.
Yeah.
And looks like we are basically out of time. So we may have to respond to questions if the questions are in the chat.
Yeah, no, that's what I was actually going to mention, and I appreciate you being cognizant of the time, Theresa. I would love if everyone would just take a moment and answer the poll as we're kind of wrapping up. Please, so we're gonna stick around for a few more minutes, and if you want to ask some questions inside of the poll, if you can't stick around, go ahead and put the question in the chat area, or ask the question. We're tracking the fact that you asked that question, and I'll be personally responsible for making sure that we answer that question in the email that you provided when you registered for the webinar. So please take a moment and just answer that, respond to that poll for us. What it will do is that will just allow us to recognize what some of your needs are, so that you can reach out to us if you would like. So with Theresa, it's going to be around like reprioritization, process improvement, continuity of government services. As she mentioned in the beginning, she has a ton of experience of doing that. Now would be like a really great time to connect with her to help you establish these new priorities. With Tom, particularly around virtual public meetings and bid openings, and just like government technology and digital governance itself. With me, of course, it's going to be around comprehensive, intuitive electronic bidding. Looks like a lot of you have actually have the need to have us all reach out to you, which we are more than happy to do. So please continue to answer that. If you do have some questions, we're gonna stick around here and do our best to answer them. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us.